Chairman. Thanks.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Menendez and Ranking Member Rischen. Thank you for the full committee's attention to this difficult, urgent challenge. Undersecretary Nolan, Assistant to the Administrator Charles, thank you for your testimony and your focus on this. A vast country the size of Alaska with 45 million people that is teetering on the brink of an all-out civil war. We could be on the verge of a dramatic, large-scale humanitarian crisis, or we could, depending on the outcome of these tense preliminary negotiations in Jeddah, see a turning back towards some hope for stability. As you know, I worked hard with other members of this committee. Senator Van Hollen and I went to Khartoum to meet with the then civilian-led government of Prime Minister Hamdok and to urge General Burhan and others to continue supporting a transition to a civilian government. A subsequent coup and then a very difficult period of negotiations has left us in a place of real, I think, difficulty and desperation. We cannot allow the civilian leadership of the groups that led the brave uprising that overthrew Omar al-Bashir to be shoved aside. And I appreciate, Undersecretary, your early comment that we need a broader process and we need to implement the President's executive order. Help me understand how we will do both of these. How do we engage the civilian leadership and empower them in the next step of this process? And would you welcome legislative action here to give you more tools to target individual sanctions? I respect that the administration took tough actions in terms of suspending bilateral aid, suspending debt relief, and I think that had real impact on leaders. But there are critics who say that in the absence of targeted individual sanctions, there's the continuation of a sense of impunity that in some ways came from Omar al-Bashir never being successfully prosecuted by the ICC and decades of widespread corruption and oppression. So I introduced the Sudan Democracy Act last year to reflect the urgent need to hold these military leaders accountable. Would you support legislation at this point or welcome additional support for sanctions? And how do we broaden this process?
Senator Coons, let me first start by thanking you for your indefatigable personal diplomacy on our hardest challenges in Africa, including your willingness with Senator Van Hollen to roll up your sleeves and get to Sudan and talk to the generals. It makes a difference, and we appreciate the partnership that we have on that. Let me say that we've got to get to a situation where we can engage the civilians again. Can we do that? Do we have to wait till we can do that from Khartoum? Can we begin, assuming we can do the most urgent, which is get the humanitarian aid in and silence or lessen the guns? Can we start to do that in a more 21st century way with video meetings, et cetera? I think that remains to be seen. I do know, as I said at the beginning, that Ambassador Godfrey is trying to cast, even as he works the talks in Jeddah, as wide a net, take soundings, see what people are wanting. This has to be a process that is broadly representative of the desires of the people of Sudan and the 2019 revolution, but we welcome thoughts you have there. We are doing the work. We had done it already, but now that we have the executive order, we're doing the work to look at appropriate targets in various categories, particularly if we cannot get these generals to allow the humanitarian aid in and put their guns down. With regard to legislation, let me get a little bit more information from our negotiators after this round is over and come back to you if we may.
We'll look forward to prompt input.
Thank you.
And I do think, I understand in this moment, focusing on the commanders of these two armed forces that are battling it out literally in the streets of Khartoum. But we have to be able to find a way to include in this conversation not just regional actors, but the Sudanese people themselves and their legitimate leaders. If I might, because I have just a few moments, Assistant to the Administrator Charles, do you have the resources you need? I'm concerned about the looting of humanitarian storehouses, about the deaths of humanitarian workers. Many of your partners, our partners, are still willing to take on this very difficult and dangerous duty. What additional resources and support do you need? And are we doing enough to ask our regional and global partners to also be engaged, given the scale of the humanitarian need in other crises around the region and the world?
Many competing needs right now around the globe, and our ability to sustain a robust response in Sudan is going to be very challenged. Even before this crisis, last year we knew that Sudan was one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to Russia's war in Ukraine because of how dependent it was on wheat imports. And so we'd already tried to scale up our assistance in Sudan, and it was already going to be hard to sustain that this year given competing demands. So we're definitely pressing other donors. We were pleased to see the Saudis announce $100 million last week, but we want to see that delivered to partners that can actually deliver on the ground.
Thank you both. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Hagerty.